Rome, 1462. A Franciscan friar named Barnaba Manasseh walks into a church in central Italy. He is not there to pray. He is there to open a bank. The church has a problem. Jewish moneylenders are the only people in Europe willing to lend money to the poor, and they charge interest. High interest. Interest that leaves the borrower worse off than before. The church calls this sin. The church calls it usury. The church has spent 500 years condemning it from every pulpit in Christendom, and now the church is going to do it itself, quietly, under a different name. What Barnaba Manasseh opens that day in 1462 is called a Monte di Pietà, a mountain of mercy, a pawn shop run by the church, lending money to the poor at low interest rates. The church called it charity, but it was a bank, the first in a system that would eventually make the Vatican one of the wealthiest institutions on earth. And the story of how that happened is the story of how money itself was invented by the people who said money was the root of all evil. Lesson: every financial system has an origin, and at the origin, there is always someone who decided the rules applied to everyone else. The church discovers the power of money and the tools it invents to control it. To understand what the Vatican built, you have to go back further, back to the Crusades. It is 1119. A French knight named Hugues de Payan stands before King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. He has a proposal. He wants to create an order of warrior monks, men who fight, men who pray, men who protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. The king agrees. The Pope blesses it. They are called the Knights Templar. Within 50 years, the Templars have become something nobody planned: a bank. Here is what happened. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem had a problem. They needed money for the journey. But carrying gold across Europe and the Middle East was dangerous. Bandits, pirates, corrupt officials at every border. The Templars solved this with one idea. You deposit your gold at a Templar house in Paris. You receive a letter, a coded document, proving the deposit. You travel to Jerusalem. You present the letter at a Templar house there. You receive your gold. No gold moved, only paper. The Templars created one of the earliest systems resembling what we now call a wire transfer, 800 years before the internet, inside a religious order, blessed by a pope. But they didn't stop there. If you deposited your land with the Templars as collateral, they would lend you money against it. That is a mortgage. If a king needed to fund a war, the Templars would lend across borders at agreed rates. That is international sovereign debt. If you needed to move wealth between countries without carrying it physically, the Templars had a network of houses across 14 countries to facilitate it. That is correspondent banking. Many of the financial tools we still use today were refined and scaled inside a Christian military order under the protection of the Catholic Church. Lesson: the most powerful financial innovations in history were not invented by bankers. They were invented by institutions that needed to move power across distance and found that money was the most efficient way to do it. The church condemns what it practices, the silent contradiction at the center of everything. Here is the contradiction that sits at the heart of this story. The Catholic Church's official position on lending money for interest was clear. It was a sin. The word for it was usury, and usury was condemned in scripture, in canon law, and from every pulpit in Europe for 500 years. At the same time, the church was the largest creditor on the continent. Popes borrowed from Italian banking families. Italian banking families lent to kings on behalf of the church. The church collected tithes, 10% of every European's income, and deposited them through those same banking networks. The Medici family of Florence built the most powerful bank in 15th century Europe. Their most important client was the Pope. The Vatican's revenues flowed through Medici branches in Rome, Venice, Milan, London, Bruges, and Lyon. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, the founder, became the official banker of the papacy in 1413, not despite the church's position on money. Because of it, the church needed someone to handle the money it officially disapproved of. The Medici were willing, and the arrangement made both of them extraordinarily powerful. The church did not call the interest it collected on loans interest. It called it a gift, a voluntary contribution, a charitable donation from the borrower in recognition of the lender's generosity. The sin was in the name, not in the transaction. Lesson: the most powerful institutions do not break their own rules. They rename the thing the rule prohibits and then proceed. Understanding this is how you read every financial system that has ever existed. Villain empathy beat the Vatican Bank and why it built what it built. In 1942, Pope Pius XII established the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, the Institute for the Works of Religion. The world knows it by a simpler name, the Vatican Bank. And here is where the story gets complicated. Because the Vatican Bank was not created to launder money. It was not created to fund dictators. It was not created to hide the wealth of war criminals. It was created to protect the church. By 1942, Italy was at war. Mussolini's government had already seized assets from institutions it considered enemies. The church needed a way to hold its financial assets outside the reach of any government, any country, any political system, forever. The Vatican is a sovereign state. Its bank answers to no central bank. It reports to no financial regulator. It is accountable to, officially, only God. That structure was built for survival, and for decades, it worked exactly as intended. The church survived fascism. It survived communism. Its assets remained protected when the assets of ordinary people evaporated under every European political catastrophe of the 20th century. But a structure that answers to no one attracts people who need exactly that. In 1982, an Italian banker named Roberto Calvi was found hanging from Blackfriars Bridge in London. His pockets were filled with bricks and cash. His bank, Banco Ambrosiano, had just collapsed, missing $1.3 billion. The Vatican Bank was Banco Ambrosiano's largest shareholder. The Vatican Bank's president at the time was a man named Paul Marcinkus, a bishop from Cicero, Illinois. Italian authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. He retreated inside Vatican walls, and under the Lateran Treaty, the agreement that made the Vatican a sovereign state, Italy could not touch him. The structure built for protection had become a structure built for impunity. Not because the church intended that, but because a system that answers to no one will always, eventually, attract someone who uses that for the wrong reasons. Lesson: sovereignty is the most powerful financial tool ever created. It is also the most dangerous. Every offshore account, every tax haven, every shell company in existence is trying to replicate on a smaller scale what the Vatican built in 1942. The scandals compound, and the church cannot hide anymore. The Calvi scandal was not the last. In 2009, Italian financial police began investigating the Vatican Bank for money laundering. 23 million euros were seized from a Vatican account at an Italian bank. In 2012, the Vatican's own butler leaked thousands of internal documents to a journalist. The documents revealed financial mismanagement, corruption, and a system so opaque that even the Pope's own advisors could not fully account for where the money was going. The scandal became known as vatileaks in 2019, the most damaging revelation of all. Vatican prosecutors opened a criminal investigation into a $412 million investment. The Vatican's Secretariat of State had taken donations from ordinary Catholics, money given by people lighting candles in churches across the world, and invested it in a luxury property development in one of London's most expensive neighborhoods, Chelsea, Sloane Avenue, a building valued at £350 million. The investment went wrong. The money largely disappeared. 10 Vatican officials were put on trial. The money ordinary people gave for the poor had been used to speculate on London real estate. And here is what that tells you about the system. The Vatican Bank holds assets from approximately 80,000 clients, priests, religious orders, Catholic institutions worldwide. It manages an estimated $8 billion in assets. None of its clients, until very recently, received a statement. None of them could independently verify where their money was. They trusted because it was the church. Lesson: trust is the most powerful financial instrument ever created and the most easily weaponized. Every fraud in history, from Madoff to Enron to the Vatican, runs on the same mechanism. An institution that people believe would never betray them. Doing exactly that, reform comes. And what it reveals about the system underneath. In 2013, something unexpected happened. Pope Francis was elected. Within months, he created the Secretariat for the Economy. He brought in an Australian cardinal named George Pell to run it. Pell's mandate was simple: find out what the church actually owns. What they found stunned even the people who worked there. The Vatican had billions in assets that did not appear on any official balance sheet. Real estate across Rome that nobody had audited in decades. Investment accounts that department heads managed independently with no central oversight. A financial system so fragmented that the left hand genuinely did not know what the right hand owned. This was not all deliberate fraud. Some of it was simply centuries of accumulated opacity. When you build a financial system across 500 years, layer by layer, Pope by pope, scandal by scandal, you eventually create something that nobody fully understands, not even the people running it. That is the deepest lesson in this story. Complexity is not always designed to deceive. Sometimes it just accumulates, and accumulated complexity serves the same function as deliberate deception. It makes accountability impossible. Lesson: any financial system that cannot be read clearly by the people whose money is inside it is a system that will eventually be used against them. Transparency is not a courtesy, it is protection. Empowerment close. What this means for anyone who has ever trusted a system: the Vatican Bank still exists. It has been reformed, audited, investigated, and reformed again. It now produces annual reports. It now complies partially with international financial regulations. It is more transparent than it has ever been in its 500-year history. And it is still not fully transparent because the structure that was built in 1942 to answer to no one still fundamentally answers to no one. Here is what the Vatican's story actually teaches. Not that the church is evil, not that religion and money cannot coexist, but something more precise. Every institution, no matter how moral its stated purpose, will use the financial tools available to it. Every institution will protect its own assets before it protects the people it claims to serve. And every institution will rename the thing it prohibits in order to do it quietly. The Knights Templar called interest a gift. The Medici called their papal banking arrangement a service. The Vatican Secretariat called a London property speculation a charitable investment. Different centuries, same mechanism. The question is never whether the institution you trust is doing this. The question is, what are they calling it? Every bank you have ever used has a version of this story. Every government pension fund, every insurance company, every investment platform that promises your money is safe. They are all, to some degree, moving money in ways you cannot fully see and calling it something that sounds reassuring. The Vatican did not invent that, but they did perfect it over 500 years in the name of God. The only protection you have ever had is knowing that the mechanism exists. Now you know.